Hi, and welcome to Fantastic Friday. Today we're talking about Fantastic Four, number 16, The Return of Doctor Doom, the world's most amazing supervillain, with special surprise guest star Ant-Man. Visit the mysterious micro-world of Doctor Doom. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Godzilla's Monsterpiece Theater, a new series from IDW, which is in stores next week. Stop by your local comic store on Wednesday to pick up your copy. So we have a really nice cover here, strong design, big side view of Doom's face with the Fantastic Four in his hands, and the fun graphic device of a magnifying glass showing us a glimpse of Ant-Man. And then we get this really nice forced perspective drawing of Doctor Doom, the Four, and Ant-Man. And this story starts off in a really nice kind of inventive way. There's a lot of forward momentum in the opening of this story. First, a scientist, an astronomer more specifically, discovers a new comet. And then a hospital that had a power failure gets a burst of light that allows them to complete their surgery and save a life. And then the flash of light halts a burglary. And we see that who was responsible for all three of these incidents was actually, it's not a comet. It's Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, flashing by on his way to the Baxter Building. He gets there, the place is deserted. But then a tiny stretching hand gets his attention. The Fantastic Three have been shrunken down and they're being sucked out of an air duct. Johnny seals it up. They get back to their normal size. And they exchange stories how each of them had a similar incident before where they'd shrunken down. Johnny tells his story. He was working on his car and then shrank down and got sucked into the engine. And only by transforming did he save his life. Ben Grimm was doing a workout and then he shrunk and hid out in a guinea pig cage. Although that looks to me like a squirrel with his tail up behind him. Sue was on a talk show. She shrank down. Reed was in the middle of piloting his section of the Fantastic Car when he shrank down and had to regain control of the craft. The one person who might be able to help them with this mystery is Ant-Man. And one of his ants hears the story and it gets transmitted through the internet from one ant to the other and eventually gets back to Ant-Man with his special helmet where you can understand the language of ants. He shrinks himself down, gets into his rocket launcher, human cannonball style, launches him across the city. He lands on two flying ants, rides them like some kind of Greco-Roman god. Ant-Man, again, is just such a fun character. He was one of Stan Lee's favorites, but always sort of a character on the periphery, never quite hit the big time, but there's just so much there. He's just got he's got all these great gimmicks, this great world, amazing costume design. And I'm glad that in recent years, Ant-Man has gotten his due in the Marvel movies. Ant-Man lands on the phone receiver and starts talking to the Thing. Reed puts a magnifying cube over him so that they can see him better. It'll be a little bit larger and his voice will be amplified. They tell him about their hardships, what's been going on. And so he gives them a dose of his shrinking and growth formula so that if this happens to them again, they'll be able to get themselves out of it. The Thing is helping Alicia with her spring cleaning, moving a piano. Reed gives him a dose of disgusting tasting formula that he's developed.
It tastes like dishwater. Can't you even use some chocolate flavor or something?
Never mind the taste, old friend. Let's watch the results. The Thing gets turned back into Ben Grimm. But unfortunately, he's still holding the piano. A nice little visual gag, especially since the piano is off panel, so you don't realize it until that last moment when the piano gets dropped with a bong. Alicia is upset about all this stuff, and she confesses that she loves the Thing exactly as he is. In fact, maybe it's even like her kink or her fetish. She likes this lumpy, rocky guy much better than this boring, smooth-skinned human being. Then tells Reed to stop it with these formulas and maybe try to come up with a formula that can restore Alicia's sight. I don't think that subplot has been pursued, at least during the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby run. Johnny's at a weenie roast, providing the heat for the weenies. And then Glenville High light display. He puts on a little show. Sue is working on a new perfume because she's realized a hole in their defenses is that when she turns invisible, dogs can still detect her scent. So if she comes up with a scent that can deaden a dog's sense of smell, she'll be able to be truly undetectable. She tests it out, but it doesn't work. The dogs love her. They're all over her. Now the group's back together. They keep getting these messages, a male voice and a female voice, a male voice taunting them and a female voice trying to warn them. And so they decide to shrink down into this micro world that they've detected and see what's going on. They get there and they find out they're in this hostile sci-fi quasi-medieval world ruled by Doctor Doom, who had shrunken down the last time they'd seen him, shrunken down into nothingness. Apparently he'd shrunken himself down into this micro world where he is now the ruler. And he can shrink them further, lord it over them. And he tells his backstory of how he came to this world. It was somewhat primitive, and then he conquered it with his science. He became the sort of like a wizard to the king, and before you know it, imprisoned the king and the princess. So sort of hinting at the sort of, monarch version of Doom, the Lord of Latveria that we're going to see in later issues. And we get a cool fight scene with the Four, this shrunken down version of the Four versus, these cool armored figures. Doom catches Sue in a little glass jar, knocks them out, puts them in prison with the king and Princess Perla in this underwater prison. Turns out they're not underwater. They're actually in a sea of acid. Johnny and the princess have some romantic chemistry, and she tells the story of, the real doom that's awaiting them, that Dr. Doom has contacted the planet Tok, another planet in this micro world, or this microverse. They're not calling it a microverse yet, just calling it a micro world, but they will in a later issue, I think issue 68 of the Fantastic Four, they will start talking about the microverse many years before Micronauts. Dr. Doom has contacted this other microplanet, Tok, and told them to come here, and he will hand the Fantastic Four over to them, and that they will use the Fantastic Four as their servants. Reed Richards will become a bridge. The Thing will become a diamond miner. The Torch will be a cannon for them to use in their wars. And Susan Storm will run the kitchen. She'll boil potatoes, and just what working in that kitchen is doing to her hair. She just looks more miserable in this possible future than any character I've seen in this comic so far. Ant-Man wonders what happened to the Fantastic Four, so he decides to follow. And this is, it's pretty much the plot of Ant-Man and the Wasp in Quantumania. Ant-Man, following a missing person into this micro world and finding he's bitten off more than he can chew. He gets captured by Dr. Doom, and in their prison cell, they create an acid-proof submersible, which they take to get themselves out of there. The Invisible Girl unties the bonds that bind Ant-Man, and the Four swing into action. The spaceship is getting ready to land. And Marvel Comics at this period, Jack and Stan have been doing all these science fiction space stories and monster stories, and then now these superhero stories. And this is the first time I've ever seen this sequence, and I don't know that I've seen it again, but what a great idea. You have an invading army, invaders in a spaceship, and the way you defeat it is the Thing grabs this tower, and Ben Grimm, All-American, uses it as a baseball bat to swat that spaceship back where it came from. Beautiful. The fight continues. Invisible Girl snags Dr. Doom's gun out of his hand, and he knows it's over. He escapes serial villain style and escapes back to the larger world. The Fantastic Four do a little bit of cleanup of his army, and the king and the princess get returned to their positions of power. Princess Perla and Johnny say goodbye and hope to someday meet again as the Fantastic Four and Ant-Man return to the larger world they came from. What a fun little story. The Fantastic Four, they're like a science team, they're explorers, and so it's really cool when you get a new world for them to explore and get involved in. We get a spotlight on Reed Richards where he explains his powers, the limitations of his stretching, how far he can stretch, and what happens to him the further he stretches, and the way he can sort of become all kinds of useful things like a spare tire, and that due to the extreme flexibility and elasticity of my molecular structure, I can absorb the impact of any type of shell, except an atomic missile, without suffering any physical harm. Naturally, however, this can be tremendously exhausting and leave me in a weakened condition for hours. I mean, he really is the Superman of Marvel, and he has Superman's invulnerability. And of course, a mention of his special costume composed of unstable molecules which can stretch and contract as his body does. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Godzilla's Monsterpiece Theater, a new comic series from IDW in stores next week. Head down to your local comics retailer on Wednesday and pick up your copy. I'll see you next time for a fantastic Friday.